Welcome back to the Better Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Meckling, and thanks for tuning in today. If this is your first time listening in, welcome. Now, I do recommend that you start from the first episode and listen to each one in order because the topic of conversation will flow from episode to episode. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I do want to remind you guys that I don't have any medical education and that everything I discuss is information that I've received from various psychiatrists and psychologists, as well as books I've read and various research on the internet. Now let's dive right in. Today's episode is all about boundaries. Boundaries, as simple as they may sound, are very difficult to not only form, but hold up against others. Practice setting boundaries for yourself. Start with someone or something small to get comfortable with it, and then continue to bigger and more important boundaries. Setting boundaries is essential if we want to be both physically and emotionally healthy. Creating boundaries is empowering. By recognizing the need to set and enforce limits, you protect your self-esteem, maintain self-respect, and enjoy healthy relationships. Unhealthy relationships can cause emotional pain that can lead to things like dependency, depression, anxiety, and even stress-induced physical illness, and nobody wants that. A lack of boundaries is like leaving the door to your house unlocked. Anyone, including unwelcome guests, can enter at will, but on the other hand, having too rigid boundaries can lead to isolation. Like living in a locked-up castle, no one can get inside. Now, what exactly are boundaries? Well, I'm glad you asked. Boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify for themselves what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for others to behave around them and how they will respond when someone steps outside of those limits. The easiest way to think of a boundary is a property line. We've all seen the no trespassing signs, which sends a clear message that if you violate that boundary, there will be a consequence. This type of boundary is easy to picture and understand because you can see the sign and the border that it protects. Whereas personal boundaries can be a lot harder to define because the lines are invisible, can change, or interactions are acceptable or unacceptable. So I'm sure you're wondering, why is it so important to set boundaries? Well, it's important to practice self-care and self-respect, to communicate your needs in a relationship, to make time and space for both positive interactions, and to set limits in a relationship in a way that is healthy. Now, physical boundaries provide a barrier between you and an intruding force. Your physical boundaries include your body, sense of personal space, and your privacy. These boundaries are expressed through clothing, shelter, noise tolerance, verbal instruction, and body language. An example of a physical boundary violation is a close talker. I know we've all had to deal with one of those. Your immediate reaction is to step back in order to reset your personal space. By doing this, you're sending a signal to the other person that they are invading your personal space and overdoing your personal boundary. Now, just like physical boundaries, we also have emotional and intellectual boundaries. These protect your sense of self-esteem and ability to separate your feelings from others. When you have a weak emotional boundary, it's like getting caught up in the middle of a hurricane with no protection. You expose yourself to being greatly affected by others' words, thoughts, and actions and end up feeling bruised or wounded or even betrayed by somebody. Now, it seems obvious that no one would want their boundaries violated, so why do we allow it to happen? Well, there's fear of rejection and abandonment or fear of confrontation, but there's also things like guilt or the fact that maybe we've never been taught to have a healthy boundary. Healthy boundaries allow you to have high self-esteem and self-respect, like I mentioned earlier. They share personal information gradually in a mutually sharing and trusting relationship. They protect physical and emotional space from intrusion, and they empower yourself to make healthy choices. Now, I know that was a ton of information today that I kind of threw at you, but I hope you guys found it helpful and useful for not only yourself, but for others as well, because maintaining a healthy boundary really is so important. Now, today I'm going to leave you with the hold tight technique. Place your right hand under your left armpit, leaving your thumb exposed in the front. Use your left hand to gently grip your right arm beneath your shoulder and breathe into the space between your arms, softening your shoulders and your jaw. Softly and sweetly remind yourself, all of my emotions, no matter how overwhelming they can be, are safely contained here. Hold until you feel yourself relaxing. The somatic self-hold reduces feelings of being overwhelmed and increases the sense of internal emotional control. Now, don't forget, you can always call 988, which is the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline, if you're ever having a mental health situation and need to speak to someone immediately. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you found it helpful and educational and enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget to listen in to the next episode on every other Thursday, as well as my music that I've released on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. My music is listed under the name Ash, A-S-H, which is in all capital letters with an exclamation point. Also, feel free to give this podcast a follow on Instagram, X, Facebook, or Threads at Better Yourself Podcast. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. See you guys later.